This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. And if you're looking for podcast production support, we highly recommend them. Find them at trisonic.co.uk.
We're seeing it creep in, right, across all these different parts of the industry. We're not going to immediately see a huge number next year from what we would call AI search, but it is coming.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Yes, it's the holiday season, and we're just days away from Christmas. But it's also the global ad spend report season. Business leaders are getting a holistic look at how the total ad market performed in the UK and around the world, and also what to expect for next year. WPP Media's This Year, Next Year report released on December 8th, and it has become something of an annual tradition to host its author and global president of business intelligence, Kate Scott-Dawkins, on this show before the end of the year. She returns once again to unpack this latest report. We spoke about the state of the global economy, downside risks for marketers, and whether AI is likely to drive growth next year. This is the final episode of the podcast we at The Media Leader are releasing this year, and I've had a wonderful time producing and hosting the show all throughout 2025. Thank you to all of our wonderful guests and to all of you listeners out there for tuning in. We'll be taking a few weeks off for the holidays, but we will be back up and running in the new year. Until then, this is my conversation with Kate Scott-Dawkins. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Thank you for getting up at the crack of dawn out in the West Coast, I believe, of the U.S. Is that right?
That's right. Just north of San Francisco. But the media world still revolves around London and New York for the time being. So here I am.
Well, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about the This Year, Next Year report. And the latest release actually surprised me, I have to admit, in how optimistic it was, especially after the summer forecast was downgraded over tariff uncertainty, essentially, among other issues. And so I wanted to sort of start with some top lines, especially given the context of a more optimistic report this December. What are some of the key takeaways?
I'd say we're not actually a mile away from where we were last December. We had said 7.7%. So we're still upgraded from that, but it is more of a return to earlier forecasts, removing the sort of hangover from the tariff announcements in June's report, the timing of that announcement. So yeah, we are more optimistic. I think there's been economic news in terms of retailers, consumers, and manufacturers sort of mitigating what we had anticipated as the effects and the costs of the tariffs. So that's part of it. And then the other big thing and a theme that really shines throughout the report and is probably unsurprising to a lot of people is the impact of AI. And there are multiple facets of that, really, that we're seeing. So you have certainly just the amount of investment that it's putting into the economy. It's been a huge driver of U.S. GDP growth, construction, hiring of people for those teams in tech companies. There have also been really applications within advertisers, not just in their marketing teams, but across factory floors and logistics and product development. And some of those savings we believe are going to be invested back into marketing and advertising. And then the third piece is really the sort of creation of entirely new companies and advertisers. And we believe there's a potential for those new advertisers to be maybe even higher intensity advertisers than the companies that they're replacing. That is, they're spending a higher percentage of their revenue on advertising, potentially because they don't have the same cost structure of the more traditional incumbents that they're replacing and coming after.
When we chatted when I would listen to you on the press briefing, you noted that some of those AI companies are starting to spend a larger degree on advertising, but the beneficiaries are also more likely to be other big tech companies. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more about that, especially given that we saw in some quarters like 20+% growth from the likes of Meta and Alphabet throughout this year. Are they going to continue growing at that pace in part because of some of the spend of some of these new advertisers that are coming into the market?
It's a great question. There are a number of different things going on here. Certainly the growth of especially these digital and social platforms, or Amazon as well, was 20% plus right through, I think, all 3 quarters of this year. Acceleration in growth of advertising revenue from both Meta and Alphabet or Google this year. And our social category or channel isn't quite growing at that speed globally, which means that we are still seeing share shifts. So this is part of a long-standing transition from the more traditional forms of media like linear television and print and terrestrial audio into more digital formats. And that's a trend that we, I think, heard even more in the voiceovers and the conversations with individual markets. It really, I think, happened first in large markets like the US and the UK, and is now really being seen all the way through global markets. And those beneficiaries are really those largest globally scaled platforms. And that's both because they tend to benefit large multinational advertisers that can standardize and buy across a single partnership or strategic plan, and also because they have a huge array of smaller and direct advertisers as well, which are really the bulk of their revenue at this point.
I mean, we're speaking on the day that Netflix has bought Warner Brothers Discovery, or pending regulatory review. There's lots of other consolidation happening among some of those more traditional players. I'm curious if you think we can expect maybe more of that, given that so much of the ad growth is being funneled to the big tech giants effectively, or if you expect a rotation maybe away from some of the tech giants, maybe to more quote unquote brand advertising, or a return to some of the more traditional players, especially given that they have developed a lot more digital capacity and digital equivalents.
Yeah, so you've hit on another couple of themes from the report. One is consolidation. I think we're absolutely going to see more of that this year and in the coming years. Well, we're almost at the end of 2025 when we're recording this, but over the next 12 months and beyond. That's not just across more sort of legacy or incumbent companies like a Warner Brothers Discovery, but also even amongst the newer companies. So we're expecting to see it within the retail media world as well, as a result of the benefits of scale, again, that we're seeing amongst these large companies. So you have it across all factors. You have in France the combination of the Values retail media network with Infinity. You have ITV looking at selling its media entertainment business, and Sky making an offer. So we have combinations across all of these different channels, and it's I think in a quest to scale and compete with the biggest players in the world. Now, they're also not safe on all counts, right? AI is entering the picture, and the growth of chatbots and different types of search and different types of consumer touchpoints and journeys are going to shake this up again. So I don't want to say the current leaders are all set in their place and nothing can change. And the other real theme from the report is just how important brand and priming still is. So WPP Media put out another piece of great research this year called How Humans Decide, in collaboration with Oxford Said Business School. Even though I went to Cambridge, so but still.
I went to Oxford, so I think it's a fantastic report.
Oh, there you go. Okay. We still won the boat race this year.
And every year.
But that really touched on how important it is to be in that, decision-making set for consumers early all the time, because they're probably only considering really a couple of brands at the point of sale. We saw the same kind of research in data we got from Criteo this year. So people cannot walk away from brand. It's just the places where brand happens are maybe going to expand, but big, impactful sight, sound, and motion will continue to play a huge role in this new world.
I want to talk a little bit more about tariffs, because they were such a big topic throughout the year. And your report notes how retailers have pulled inventory forward, that consumer spending has been resilient even in the face of, I would probably characterize, a relatively weak labor market and substantial price inflation, especially in the U.S. market. I'm curious what's going on here. Are you expecting consumer spending to actually continue on at the rate that it is, or do you think the economy actually maybe is a bit weaker than what the current report might suggest?
Well, our base case is for continued consumer spending. So that's what's driving the headline growth numbers that are still anticipating pretty robust growth for advertising over the next 5 years. I would say there are inherent risks that we discuss in the report that would lead to a downgrade if the situation were to, shift or substantially get worse for consumers. And there are a couple of things that we're watching very, very closely in that world. One is just the extent to which, not just in the US, but in many of the markets that we look at, we are seeing what people are calling a K-shaped recovery, right? That is, in the US, we have data from Moody's that says the top 10% of households in the United States are accounting for really nearly 50% of consumer spending, which is pretty phenomenal. Now, those people have stock markets. They probably have mortgages that were entered into when interest rates were very low. So they're happy to sit there and have equity accumulate. We're even hearing things like from CPG companies in their earnings about how they're seeing differences in spending patterns between households who own stocks and households who don't. So that is expected to continue, again, unless there's some kind of major shock, like a asset price shock. If you want to talk about the stock market coming down dramatically, that might have an impact, right? The other piece is that on a much broader level, we are seeing the vast expansion of things like buy now, pay later across really pretty much every market that we spoke to and asked about. They are seeing a rise in that kind of spending behavior. And we also have across a lot of markets expansion of, a kind of class of riskier assets or activities, maybe if you want to talk about sports betting, crypto, prediction markets, sort of everything in that world, where that exposure is increasing, I think, a number of consumers to risk. And then again, if we saw a sharp downturn in the labor market, that might compound some of those existing debts and areas of concern.
So, I mean, obviously you can only forecast what you forecast, and this is not necessarily the base case, but is it sustainable to have an economy that is having this many different types of concerns around labor market? There's been certainly quite a lot of layoffs in the media and entertainment industry, and you would think that might happen with more consolidation. This is also inclusive, of course, of media agencies and holding groups consolidating this year. But you also then have, as you mentioned, maybe some of these buy now, pay laters effect and a K-shaped recovery. I mean, how long can a K-shaped recovery go before you run into some serious issues, if that makes sense?
It's a great question for a trained economist, which I am not. Look, I think we are figuring that out as we go. There are a number of different perspectives on how much abundance and productivity gain we're going to get from some of these new technology advances, whether that's going to grow fast enough to be able to support the current economic path that we're on. So hard to know, but I think in terms of what we can see today, and I'm not, again, in a position to say we're definitely going to have some kind of event at a certain date on the horizon, that we're anticipating sort of this current trajectory to continue.
It's hard to predict the black swan, but it feels like there's been quite a few in recent years, so you never know.
But I think brands are now, they've worked on the muscle to incorporate that and plan and work through it, right? So I think the first shock of many was more disruptive, and now that brands have weathered quite a few of those in very quick succession, right? I think the sense that we've gotten from talking to advertisers is, yeah, we can do this, we can figure it out, we will mitigate, we will plan, we will continue investing because that's ultimately what drives growth. And so I think it is a very different tenor, even amidst that uncertainty that we're hearing.
I think that connects to another point that I thought was very notable from this report and from past reports as well, which is that consistently ad spend growth is outpacing GDP growth and has been for some time. And I'm curious, is it the sort of the general knowledge that we should continue keeping or increasing our marketing budget through downturns that is causing that, or if you expect some sort of a snapback at some point to GDP growth and marketing growth actually merging a little bit again at some point in the future?
The interesting thing, I will look at total global advertising growth versus GDP growth a little bit more closely than I tend to look at it market by market. And part of that is because advertising has become so cross-border in nature that I believe it's difficult to sort of disentangle that and look at it as a purely neat number, right, within a given market, because you may have economic benefits or returns that aren't necessarily accruing to the people within one market. One of the things that we have seen and are continuing to see in this report is just how impactful the spending from Chinese overseas advertisers has been in other markets. We were expecting a greater pullback in the US. I think some of that has returned again, which has made our US estimate maybe a little bit healthier. We are seeing that help drive Brazil's growth, which is over 14%. And that's not just the sort of fast fashion retailers like Temu and Shein, but it's also car OEMs like BYD sponsoring soap operas in Brazil, spending a lot on sports sponsorships, doing those big branding activities, but in markets to expand their global reach, especially while consumer demand is a little bit slower domestically in China. And we're seeing the sort of ongoing price wars and subsidies for domestic consumers there. So it gets tied up in all of those things. I think the other thing to look at is how important advertising is to a lot of the global economy right now. If you look at some of the top companies by market cap, most of them sell advertising. Google, Microsoft, Apple, Meta, not NVIDIA, but really Amazon, across a lot of those big companies, Walmart, they're all sellers of advertising. We are seeing an increasing number and type of companies that sell advertising, some as a way to, subsidize services that they're offering to consumers. So one has to wonder whether that becomes an even more prominent model going forward.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you mentioned the commerce market could be upended a little bit next year? However, a lot of the connections that some of those big companies are having with advertising, like an Amazon especially, is that advertising's been a really high margin business for them. So I'm just a little curious if you could talk more to the role and growth that commerce might have in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I mean, we've seen sort of a share shift from content-driven advertising revenue to commerce in recent years, and the quest for that tie up of media exposure and purchase. What I think is interesting now, and it looks at the different aspects of sellers of retail media advertising, right? So Amazon is the largest globally, sort of ex-China. We'll put aside sort of Meituan and Alibaba for a second. If you look at Amazon, they are big enough to have a very high sort of share of search start. They have their own AI tools like Rufus. And so they are able to, at the moment, take a different path than some of these smaller retail media sellers. So they're able to say, no, AI company, you cannot come crawl my site and sell my inventory. They have litigated against Perplexity for exactly that thing. On the other hand, you've seen some of these smaller retailers are ones that don't have their own sort of AI play, and Etsy, Shopify, even Walmart currently, partnering with a company like OpenAI to allow their inventory to be bought. And that's a really interesting dynamic. So in the short term, or maybe in the long term, maybe they're getting incremental sales, right? It's expanding their distribution of products to customers. But it is likely leading to less opportunity for that retail media revenue on their own sites. So how that plays out over the next few months to a year is going to be really interesting. But that's one of the challenges that we've written about.
Most of our listeners are based here in the UK, and I'm just curious, we mentioned some other markets, Brazil being a big grower, India as well. How's the UK comparing to the rest of the world? I know it's still the largest in Europe, but everyone here seems like is complaining about the state of the economy, and arguably rightfully so. Is there an impact on ad spend that's following some of the perception of the UK economy?
It's still really pretty healthy. So we're expecting even into next year 7% growth in UK. So for 2026, and some of that I think has been a little bit of a benefit of, again, companies who maybe were looking to sell to consumers in the US, looking outside, looking to Europe. I think they're experiencing some benefit from that. I think they are being helped by being a more services-led economy versus a production or product-led economy. So Germany is growing roughly half that pace expected to in 2026. They're under a little bit more pressure, especially from those Chinese car OEMs in terms of what that growth is looking like in that market. So I think there's still a lot going for the UK. We are still expecting pretty robust growth into next year. In the less healthy foods regulation came through and was a little bit more permissive about brand advertising than was sort of initially talked about, which I think is also featured into our projections. So yeah, I understand it's always difficult to look at these top line growth numbers and mesh that with what people are feeling on the ground in terms of the economy. But I think we will continue to see good investment in the UK. It's been a proponent of tech and innovation and broadcast and advertising and publicity for a long time. I think that's what helps it sustain growth even through some of these tougher years.
So looking ahead to 2026 then globally, what are the key issues that you think business leaders should be looking out for, either as signs of optimism or, as you mentioned, some of the downside risks earlier? You just mentioned how AI is sort of disrupting. AI search certainly has disrupted many markets, and as you alluded to, including the commerce market. And yet most AI search isn't currently having advertising against it, but it could next year, right? Is that something to look out for?
It is, I think, still small percentages. We're talking sort of single digit share of a sort of total search even into next year. It's going to take a while to scale. So even though, for instance, we assume that OpenAI is going to release an advertising offering at some point, that's going to take a while to scale. They have other priorities today as well that they've discussed. So we are anticipating growth in that space. It's going to come, I'd say, from Google first, just because this is their core business and they've done a lot with AI mode and AI overviews already. But again, that's a rollout market by market. So it's going to take some time, but we'll start seeing that next year. And there are already decisions, I think, that advertisers are making today. So if you look at their use of communities, how they're thinking about and looking at ad partners like YouTube and Reddit, which are seen as being maybe some of the source material for large language models, at least currently. Again, these algorithms and calculations constantly change. But I think Reddit's growth, for instance, is benefited by that, in addition to their commitment to advertisers recently and how much they're putting into growing those relationships. So we're seeing it creep in, right, across all these different parts of the industry. We're not going to immediately see a huge number next year from what we would call AI search, but it is coming.
And what other types of issues do you think that business leaders should maybe be looking out for?
I think your mention and what we talked about with not over-rotating into direct response or lower funnel, if you want to use the the industry terms or parlance, but really maintaining the impacting the importance of that priming stage of brand for consumers. I think the tales we've seen recently of companies that did over-rotate into that more short-term or commerce-driven media planning, they've now reversed course. So I expect brands to be keeping a close eye on that as well into 2026.
Okay, last question. I'm going to put you on the spot. If you could only have one word to describe how you think 2026 is going to go, or the word of the year for next year, what is that word?
Oh, I do like, who was it? Cambridge Dictionary. Someone used parasocial as their word of the year, as to this. I think it gets to the community, the celebrity aspect, the potential for people to be having more experiences with and across AI in different ways that, not all of those are going to be sustainable. People are figuring that out still. But I thought that was a great word of the year choice and something that is obviously deeply connected to everything we're seeing across advertising as well.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. But Kate, it's always a pleasure, and thank you for all your work on the This Year Next Year report. It's a great industry resource, so I appreciate your time chatting through it with me.
It's always one of my favorite parts of the year. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, TriSonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.